Welcome back here to the show. For the last segment on today's episode, we had two guests on before, so that might give you guys a reason as to why there only will be four segments on today's show. We got a lot out of Kenneth and Emron, so thank you to those guys yet again for joining me on today's show. But with the last segment of today's episode, like I mentioned, sticking with the NFC and talking about Brandon Graham and the issue sort of with their coordinators in 2023. Or actually, before I do that, I will remind you guys for one last time, if you have any questions or comments you want to make, leave it in the chat box using the tip and donations link, GSMCPodcast.net, that you see there on your screen. By using that link, I'll be able to see your question or comment in the chat box, and that way I can get a feel of what you guys are thinking, what sort of perspective you guys have on anything I say or on any of the topics we have discussed on today's show. It's a massive help for the network as well, so if you would, please leave your questions or comments using that tip and donations link, GSMCPodcast.net. But going back to Brandon Graham and the coaching issues a little bit surrounding this team last year, that was a big talk around the Eagles and just a reason as to why, it looked the way it did last year. Towards the end of the year, they were 12-1, I want to say, at one point, and then the second half of the year really didn't go as planned. They sort of gave up that number one seed there towards the end, and they had to go on the road to face the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who, as opposed to the Eagles, were very much rolling at that point in the year. They were winning one consecutive games there to end the year and won the division in the last game of the season. So they were riding a big wave of momentum, whereas the Eagles were sort of trending downward because of the issues that they had, mostly on defense because of the communication and how sloppy it just looked from a outsider's perspective. I didn't tune into every game, but to the games that I did watch, I saw there was a lot of just missed assignments, not being disciplined with your gap assignments as well. The coverages also weren't great. There was just a lot of open guys where it seemed everybody was pointing at each other as to wondering why this guy was just open. The system and maybe the communication wasn't there, but a big part of it was the coordinators, and because of the issues you saw last year, both Sean Desai and Brian Johnson were let go of this offseason, and the Philadelphia Eagles brought in two new coordinators in Vic Fangio to coordinate that defense, and Kellen Moore being the offensive coordinator this year for the Philadelphia Eagles. Definitely, you get more experience now for sure with Moore and Vic Fangio, with the experience that Vic Fangio has and the defenses that typically tend to be one of the tougher ones to beat on a year-to-year basis, and Kellen Moore having a lot of success really with the Dallas Cowboys most recently and a little bit with the Chargers, but they were also not in the best of states to really benefit off of that. I think the Eagles are just as good of a team offensively for Kellen Moore to come in here, stick his game plan into all these players, and really have all the options and weapons available to him to really succeed in 2024. But now, how does this compare to last year? Well, one of the most experienced players, Brandon Graham, on the Eagles, was asked something completely different about Jason Kelce and Fletcher Cox, about how it would be like this season to sort of have them away from the team, not being part of the roster, and how would that experience be, for Brandon Graham, who has been there basically the entirety of time with Jason Kelce and Fletcher Cox. They asked him what it would be like without them now, and he sort of took it and spun it a different way, bringing in the coordinators a little bit in his response by saying, I really think that last year, that's what we didn't have. We didn't have all the right coaches in the right position. I would say you can see the guys truly believing in what we got going on. I'm excited for the rookies coming in as well. That last part sort of touched on the life after Jason Kelce and Fletcher Cox, but firstly, to just come out and say we didn't have all the right coaches in the right positions, it is pretty blunt and straightforward, and I don't think Brandon Graham is a guy to be questioned or anything like that. He's been a prominent figure for the Eagles for so long. Everybody loves him, and nobody is going to, question him about what his opinion is. Everybody believes it. I believe it, that the coordinators and the coaches were a main issue, if not the main issue, but you don't typically see guys, just coming out and saying it like that. So that caught me off guard a little bit, but on top of the coordinators, just on the coaches like Brandon Graham mentioned, the Philadelphia Eagles also moved on from their defensive line coach, Tracy Rocker, their linebacker coach, DJ Elliott, and also their secondary coach in DJ McDonald. So a brand new slate of ideas and coaching coming in for the Philadelphia Eagles, and they're going to definitely need it to try and regain any sort of identity and just toughness and character on that defensive side of the ball. The question it sort of brings up now for me with talking about the coaches and the coordinators, and obviously that plays a big part in it, but how much was it the coaching and how much was it the personnel and players that the Eagles had at the time being when they just started trending downward? I think if you were to put a percentage on it, I would still probably split it 70-30 or 60-40 in favor of the coaches really being the main proprietor of how it looked last season. But I don't think the player personnel gets talked about too much. Of course, you can succeed a lot if your coach is one of the all-time greats, coordinating, scheming you to get open and stuff like that. But if you don't have the talent to really compete with so much talent on the offensive side of the ball these days, it's going to look sloppy. And I think that the linebacker position was one to be questionable for the Eagles last year. They weren't really getting too much pass rush from their rookie superstar in Jalen Carter. After a great start to the year, he sort of died off a little bit, and that's nothing to really blame him on because he is a rookie. He hasn't played that much football an entire season in his life, so you can't really depend on him to carry you throughout the entire season. Their pass rush really died off there as well. In the secondary, Bradbury was targeted a lot from fans for the criticism he received and also not playing up to that standard and up to that contract that the Eagles gave him as well. And also just the safety position as well. There was a lot of holes is what I'm trying to say for the Eagles. And to blame it mostly on the coaching, to say it was 90% the coaches, I don't think is fair for some of the players that were on there as well to also assume responsibility. But, Brandon Graham went into it a little bit more, and certain things he sort of sees being the difference now with having a guy in there like Vic Fangio. And he said certain things would pop up, but it popped up in a big way that last game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Everything I learned, you just want to make sure we had a proper communication. So there's real big communication going on right now within the locker room, on the field, and in the classroom. He also highlighted his excitement with Vic Fangio and how everyone now seems to just be on the same page and knows what their assignment is supposed to be, what Vic Fangio and what this identity is supposed to look like now in 2024 with a more experienced coach in there. And not to sort of dump it all on Sean Desai and Brian Johnson, but to come into a season where you have the talent, and maybe you could say they over-relied on it a little bit, at least on the offensive side. Brian Johnson coming into the Eagles and being that offensive coordinator, not too many people really know about him. And of course that doesn't really matter too much, but at some point, having a guy like that, managing all those personalities, characters, if you haven't really done it before and have too much experience with it, it's going to get a little bit too big, and it's going to seem like the moment is a bit too big for you throughout the season. And that's what it seemed to be at some points with Brian Johnson and how they maneuvered everything. There was a lot of coaches switching, especially on the defensive side of the ball, with Sean Desai getting moved up to the booth after Week 15, and then Matt Patricia really taking over the play calling after that for the last, I want to say, 6 games of the regular season and then into the playoffs. It didn't get much better after that, and having all these new ideas coming in with Matt Patricia and knowing what one guy wants, what another guy doesn't want, and how it's supposed to look, none of that equals a recipe for success for the Eagles. And you get games like against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers where they just seem to have the wheels fall off, and it didn't look at all like the team we saw in 2022 to make it to the Super Bowl. But to give you guys a little bit more information on what sort of production we were seeing out there from the defense with Sean Desai, in his last 6 games as the play caller, he was last in third down defense, allowing third down conversions on 54.8% of the time. Also last in red zone defense, allowing touchdowns or conversions 78.3% of the time, allowing an NFL high 428 yards per game and 297.8 passing yards per game at the time in those last 6 games, and also was second to last in the NFL in points per game allowed at 30. In those last 6 games, you don't need to be a genius to know that those numbers with the team that the Eagles have, playing in a decently tough conference, or at least decently tough division, and a very tricky NFC conference. It's not going to slide. All these teams are getting better in the NFC compared to the AFC, where it seems like everyone is right about their prime. The NFC is slowly getting better with all the young players that they have and new teams sort of popping up out of every division. This team, the Eagles, to sort of drop the ball a little bit there with Sean Desai. You just can't have it with everyone hitting their stride there towards the end and in his last 6 games. To be almost last in all these categories is not what you're looking for, obviously, for the Eagles. And also then, you look at Matt Patricia. Didn't get too much better after Week 15 when he took over as the play caller. He was 28th in yards per game, allowing 375, 26th in rushing yards per game allowed at 131, 24th in passing yards per game allowed at 244, 26th in yards per play, allowing 5.8 yards per play as the defensive coordinator, and also 4th to last in points per game allowed at 28 points allowed there per game during his time as the play caller. So what does this all mean now? Basically that it can't get worse. It can't get worse for the Eagles based on those numbers and based on the coaching carousel, coaching circus that you had, moving some people up, getting rid of guys, changing the responsibilities with these coaches. Now you bring in more I would say proven guys to sort of help out this defense, as well as losing Fletcher Cox and Jason Kelsey. You get an influx of younger talent that could help you out a lot, I believe, in guys like Devin White, CJ Gardner-Johnson coming in, Quinyon Mitchell, I was very high on that they drafted this year. I think he can make a quick impact right away, and also Cooper DeJean as well in the second round. This team got younger, more athletic, with some more proven players like Devin White and CJ Gardner-Johnson. It's definitely going to help out a lot. I'd like to see the pass rush, be a little bit more consistent. I think it will be with Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis. I'm pretty sure is his name, also being in there. 2 young guys there in the middle. The pass rush on the outsides is a little bit questionable, but overall they definitely got better. And again, the biggest point to make is that it's hard to get worse than those numbers that I just mentioned from Sean Desai and Matt Patricia. So it is looking up for the Eagles. They got Saquon Barkley on the offensive side of the ball. That never hurts. If your defense isn't working, you can at least try and outscore the opposition with the excess of talent that they have on the offensive side of the ball. It's going to take some time to learn it as well on both sides with Kellen Moore and Vic Fangio coming in, but very high on this Eagles team this year. They have the talent. They just now have to prove it in a lot of people's minds. If things don't go well, what does that mean for Nick Sirianni? Maybe some people start questioning Jalen Hurts a little bit more. You don't want to see that, so the Eagles definitely have a lot to prove again this year, and they have everything in place, so they should be in a good spot to do that in 2024. But that'll do it for today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I want to thank you guys for joining me today, and also remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok as well for more of the network's content. And if you want to see more of me and this show, check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel for a ton of more content out there regarding football and different sorts of ways we talk about different topics around the NFL. As a final reminder, tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more conversations and NFL discussions with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host, signing off for the last time this week. Hope you guys have a great weekend, and I hope to see you guys all back here again joining me on Monday.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go.